G'day, I'm Gary Muir from Wow Wilderness Eco Cruises in Walpole, West Australia. It's a place we've had 8 generations of our family in this area, and it's a great honour to be able to take you for a journey. It's not just a journey of seeing a special place, but it's a journey in able to discover a new way. It's looking at exactly the same things, but often thinking something different. This is really a wonderful definition of discovery. Every step there's a story, and there's an infinite number of steps, and each step is a number of stories. And we're going to go through some of that today, even from where we're going with the underground forest surrounded by some of the most ancient hills, growing some of the oldest of the eucalypts, the tingle trees, the largest girth flowering plants. There's so much endemism here that can tell an unbelievable story, and we're going to go on to that journey today. It's quite a fascinating one. This is a new way to discover the world, looking at the same thing, thinking something different. Enjoy it. What really makes this area very special is its antiquity of some of its ages. We're here in Little Walpole, and this is a very well used globe, but we're about the 35 degrees south of the equator. But of course that's changing all the time. Australia is always drifting at 35 degrees east to north at 67 millimetres every year. So we're actually on our way through. We're going to be crossing the equator. We'll start as the Americas come across, and we'll come through, and our future is sideswiping Japan and joining into China as part of what will be then the supercontinent of Asia. But if you reverse that, if you go back down here, and if the rocks we're going to be going and looking at can nearly be mirrored at Casey Station, right the way down here. So, and of course that's who we're drifting away from. So a lot of these parts of the rocks are the metamorphosized granitic gneiss that happened from our collision with Antarctica about 1.2 billion years ago. Now from that collision, from these ancient granites that had come together, the paleomagnetists have worked out that the Earth's like a big magnet. You've got your North Pole and you've got your South Pole, and who's in the middle? It's Walpole! But even though we're not always going to be at Walpole, what's going to be happening, if you reverse time, the paleomagnetists have shown that the magnetized crystals that formed in the granitic gneiss, this metamorphic rock that actually has come from two ancient climate, the heat and pressure has changed it, and the magnetite crystals have lined up in the magnetic field of the Earth, so we can actually see where the collision actually happened. And there is a margin of error, but the most amazing thing is where it's actually paleomagnetists have said. We're at the 35 degrees south of the equator, but we smashed Antarctica at the 58 degree parallel in the northern hemisphere. That's sort of equivalent with Scotland going through into Siberia. That's in this area. So we have literally gone from the North Pole right the way down. There's evidence of Australia being down at the South Pole, and now we're drifting away. We're actually in the big teak time. We're actually onto our 3rd trip in the northern hemisphere. What you see in the Earth today is just one snapshot of a dynamic trip of the Australian continent travelling around the world, joining together, separated, and you can't get much more disparate of the Earth than that. And sooner or later we keep coming together at supercontinents. And that time when we smashed into Antarctica, so you imagine this is Antarctica, and so imagine this is Australia. Now you've got to remember, it's the ancient parts. For example, the east didn't exist. It's the oldest craton of West Australia is in the southwest of West Australia. So we actually smashed into Antarctica, and we pushed up a massive mountain range, higher than the Swiss Alps it's anticipated to be. But we weren't alone. So here's West Australia here. There was already another country here, and you'd never guess who it was. It was India. India had already joined here. Now which part of India? This is the point of India. So this is the east coast of India, laying now what's also on Antarctica. Australia was that. So the collision was more like this, smashing in together, because we joined with Antarctica about 2.3 billion years ago, and then we drifted on, and we went right the way through, passing the equator. And when we did, you'd think, here we are, we're coming down to the equator, whoa, balmy, you can't beat it. But of course, we hit in the middle of snowball Earth, so we were actually under solid ice. We had the climate of Antarctica. But on the way across, we joined, can you hold it there, please? On the way, we joined with South America and Africa smashed together and put up, and the collision rippled through South America, right the way through Antarctica, and pushed up, of course, the famous Pitman Ranges in the middle of Australia that would go on to later form the Uluru and Katajuka when they eroded down. And then we drifted right the way down, and on the way down we were then joined also by the northern supercontinent. So come the next supercontinent from Rodinia as Pangaea. And then when we drifted apart, Laurasia went to the north and Gondwana started to break up. I waved for 80 years at this point here, and they have, no, they just keep going. They'll be all right, Claire. They're coming out. I've just got to wave. 80 years we've been doing a wave from the front veranda here since Valentine's Day 1937.
How many generations of you?
We've done 8 generations, but the tradition, this boat trip's been going for 107 years. It was started by a Frenchman, Pierre Boulanger, who was a lawyer who actually talked the minute they were going to exploit all this. If you look around, all these trees here, see these trees, these are the carry trees. They're a utilisable hardwood resource, but you can look at it in 2 ways. You can look at the beauty of nature right on the water's edge, and yet as the human species came through, we want to exploit this. It was going to be logging. It was so easy. You could just log it and put it into boats and ship it around the world. And then what they were going to do, they found coal at Coal Mine Beach, and a Frenchman had come here. He was so entranced by the wilderness of the area, when he hosted these these ministers to exploit this place, he was horrified. He's sitting in a boat. I'll show you the boat. This is the most amazing boat. This is the Frenchman who started this boat cruise. His name is Pierre Boulanger. This is his boat, and the trip you are here on began because of this moment. February 28, 1910. This Frenchman, in his boat, this is his brother Andre, and the photographer is a man by the name of Bert Saw, who took this photo in November 1910. And the reason he took it is he was sent down because originally all on the back here was going to become part of a city. All these trees were to be exploited and shipped around the world. Behind this hill here, this hill here is actually this hill here.
Oh, I got to go up the front. Let's go there.
Yeah. So, and what we'll do, we turn into the grass tree. This is what's quite amazing, is you can take the same shot after 107 years. Even one of the most oldest of our plants that we have are the grass trees, and they can grow for hundreds of years. So if this is 107 years old, if this is the hill here, if this is this little peninsula here, then where is the grass tree? And it's still there, and it's right there. So Claire, if you can turn towards the grass tree, so this is where the Frenchman is actually sitting there. Now if you turn around now turn back again to the starboard side. So imagine he's sitting there, look at that. Hold it there, hold it there.
Ah, gotcha.
Right there,
Gotcha.
right there.
There.
And now look at that.
Wow.
And that can only happen because of one event that happened on February 28, 1910. The ministerial party led by Moo Cow Mitchell, they called him Moo Cow because every time he saw these carry trees he wanted to put in a dairy farm. And he would later become the Premier of our state, the Mitchell Plateau, the Mitchell River, the Mitchell Freeway. It's all named after this guy. Thank you. And so what happened with Moo Cow Mitchell, Mitchell hopped in the boat, in this boat here, with Pierre Boulanger. Neil McNeil sat behind, representing Millers and Jarrah Timbers Proprietary Limited. Harry F. Johnson, the Surveyor General of WA, he was going to put a city here. That's where they were going to survey the town, was actually going to go there. They were all ready to do this. And this one man, a French lawyer, he was able to influence. He heard, he said, how can you? He said, for nothing more gorgeous can be imagined than these trees on the water's edge. But can you imagine it in French? And he said, rien de plus magnifique ne peut être imaginé. Nothing more gorgeous could be imagined. And he taught the ministers not only in reserving this, but he influenced the reservation of this water. This is the first waters in West Australia ever to be reserved from any professional fishing and netting. It's unheard of. Who reserves water? But so moved were those ministers about this place that they ended up starting the second national park in WA and also the first waters to ever be reserved. And the area in the back that was going to be the city, this area here, was now designated WA's first wilderness zone, and it's world famous now for its biodiversity. And its underlying rocks are from these ancient mountains that formed when we originally smashed into Antarctica 1.2 billion years ago, drifting from the north to the south, eroding to this. This is actually an ancient valley that we're going through. What's even more amazing is underneath us is a forest. There's the WA Museum have come down and looking at all these water sources. Charlie Deutsch was then curator of archaeology in the WA Museum. You imagine this is sea level. We're going to go to the opening of the ocean, and what happened is we're living in the Quaternary Ice Age now from the last 2.5 million years. And so what's actually happened, we've had glaciations, interglacials, glaciations, interglacials, around 17 of them in the last 2.5 million years. Now, we're at the moment in a balmy interglacial. In other words, we're at the level of the height of where the water is today. We've still got ice on the poles, means we're still in this Quaternary Ice Age, but in this interglacial. Now, what actually happened with this interglacial event, it caused the sea to rise on the last melting. If you came here 18,000 years ago, you still had 41 kilometres to get to the shoreline. On the other side of this hill is the sea. But what actually happened is the sea's risen and flooded this ancient valley. Now, Walpole is the wettest part of the state in West Australia. We get 1.432 metres of water on average a year. It's the wettest part. And because of that, the sea came up. And these trees, these curry trees, they don't even like salt water. But they're not using this salt water. This is salt water. It's 3 rivers that converge into here. This was the ancient Walpole Valley. The trees used to come right the way to the water's edge. But when the sea came in, the silt from the other 2 rivers, the Deep River, the Franklin River, have brought so much silt, it's preserved the forest underneath us. Not turned it to stone, preserved it. So what we're going over the top are the ancient tree stumps of these curry trees that were here before the seas melted and covered the forest up. You're literally doing like a treetop walk. There's a whole world preserved in the silt underneath us. And the WA Museum, they're doing core samples and they're looking for it. And on Next Inlet, we got 6,700 years old. There was a forest that was here. So that's what you're seeing here. It's a snapshot in time, not only in the big, deep time where you've got continents travelling from the North Pole to the South Pole to Walpole, but even in the more recent period, the Quaternary period, we're in the Holocene epoch, which is this interglacial period that has just thrived with human species spreading throughout the world, and the beginning of agriculture going throughout the world. It's the time that this sea has come to this level. This is sort of the last pulse from 18,000 years ago. It didn't just come up slowly, it did it in pulses, and the last pulse finished 6,700 years ago. But now, you know, interestingly, that climate change, that whole sea has risen. Any warming will cause it still to rise more. Even originally, we were going to put the treetop walk up here. It's just an amazing view that you can put it all into perspective. Overlooking here and right out here. We'll end up going out to the mouth, to the secret entrance, and we'll walk over and see some of those ancient granitic rocks, granitic gneiss rocks. And then we'll work our way. But first we're going to the island of the Black Snake, the Aboriginal name for this place. That's their traditional way. This is Walpole, and this is how we know it. You know, it's not upside down. It's just, you know, we're down under. Why? It's only in our human mind that everyone else should be up the other way. But it's also, this is where we're going. We left from here. We went through the knolls, and we're heading towards the Ile du Serpent Noir, or the island of the Black Snake, which is just here. This is the snake here, island here. So then, if you look at that hill in the background behind Snake Island, is this hill here. And that's the hill here. And what was the scary part of it is this is how close it came to becoming part of a city here. The surveyed road was already put in. And this is where a wharf was to go, and they're going to bring in vessels in here to ship this all out. But this area now has become part of this amazing wilderness zone. Now the Murrum people who called this place Nornunup. Norn means black snake. When you double the words, they often meant the plural. So non is many black snakes, and up is place of. So you've come to place of the black snake. And this island's famous for them because the Norn is the tiger snake. That's this one here. So the tiger snake is just it's an amazing animal that lives. This is our famous tiger snake, and its favourite food is frogs. And Walpole is famous for frogs, especially this one. This one here is the Spicaspina flammaceauruli. It's the sunset frog. It's one of the most basal frogs that we have, and it's been studied, but it's only from this area. But this, because we're the wettest part of the state, because 98% of the diets of our landlocked snakes are frogs. So, but this is quite bizarre. Normally when you have an island, snakes that's surrounded by salt water, frogs can't cross salt water. They have a semi-permeable skin. Osmosis doesn't allow them. But this valley here is the Deep River Valley, one of the 3 valleys that converge to flood this ancient forest here. So what happened is when it comes in, fresh water has a less specific gravity than salt water, and so when it floods, or you get a big low pressure system that causes the sea to rise, the fresh water runs on the top. It grabs some of the frog spawn, and there's a freshwater swamp just in here. And the frogs have made a whole collection. You sit here where the houseboat is. They describe it's like going to an enduro at night with the motorbike frogs. And then you've got the Crinia georgiana, the quacking frog just starts up. And these are the males trying to crack onto the girls sitting in this little swamp here. And it's just an amazing event of nature just to listen to theirs. The banjo frogs start up. This guy here goes tick-tock. TikTok. He's not on this island. He's found in some really rare spots just up the Franklin River, which is a river just as the 3rd river that has converged onto here. And this island, you must remember, used to be a hill. It was the top of a hill that laid on the edge of a special river. And the Murrum people, who were the traditional Noongar people who were coming here, they used to go to this hill, and this was very, very special for them. And why they also called this place Nornakullup and place of the Black Snake. Of course, when the seas rose, it separated this hilltop into a little island. And even our family actually bought this island, and we put our cows on it. Every cow died in a week. What we didn't know, but the Murrum people soon taught us, it has one of the most poisonous plants on earth on here. So we're going to go to that island now. Anna, there she is. Wow, I've touched her. Yeah, she got accidentally caught in a cat trap. Hey, you guys? Have you seen the peregrine falcon diving yet? There's 2 peregrine falcons. And so what's happened, if you watch 3 times a day, the peregrines are getting the New Holland honeyeaters. This is Anna, this is Anna and Bubba, the 2 white-breasted seagulls as well. There's the peregrine. Here we go. They're all on. So right now, they start attacking the New Holland honeyeaters. There's one going now. It's in a dive. Ah!
Wow.
Just got one there.
We saw one over there dive. Like went straight down.
Yep. So we've got... These are the two white-breasts. They're amazing. They're just onto it. But these 2 little falcons are just in here, and he's just gone back and landed up in the tree into the banksia there. It's pretty cool. You're in a cool spot where people travel the world for this week that the peregrines arrived, to actually get footage of these peregrines diving. So this island, this is Snake Island, and these are these ancient granite rocks that were the remnants from that mountain range, but they grow some really special species. And this plant here is the most poisonous plant you'll see in your life. This is Gastrolobium biloba.
Really?
And 1 kilogram of leaves of that plant is enough poison to kill 21 people.
What?
The poison is sodium monofluoroacetate, and it stops your Krebs cycle. It stops how your cells, your mitochondria, produces energy. When you eat something like a cake, you want to convert that glucose into adenosine triphosphate. Just move my fingers 3 times. I've just used up around 70 million adenosine triphosphate molecules. But to do it, this guy Hans Krebs worked out how to do it. He won the Nobel Prize in 1953. And he found out you need to have an acetate in the process. And our bodies use oxaloacetate, but the poison in that plant is sodium monofluoroacetate, which replaces our acetate, and it stops the production of energy. Now, our family bought this island. We put our cows on it, and they all died. But what's really bizarre,
How
we've
many
watched
generations ago?
animals. So we've been coming down here for 8 generations. So. I'm a 6th generation, Claire's a 7th generation, and we've got another generation also here in Walpole, the 8th generation. And our family bought this. We weren't the first to own it in relation to white man's. And what is ownership? I mean, we've got the Murrum people coming here for literally generations as part of their land before it was even an island, and we can perceive that we could own an island. But in that cultural zeitgeist of that time, it was first owned by a Yorkshire doctor who bought this, and he was growing vegetables on here to stop the Americans getting scurvy, because the American ships were getting whales from here, and they would stay here, and this place, they would trade with sealers, people killing seals here. The first exploitation of our natural resources happened here in West Australia, happened right here. They were getting whales and seals from Walpole before even Albany existed, the first white man settlement in WA. So there was this exploitation already happening. Now, this Yorkshire doctor, he was coming down here and he grew vegetables, but the Murrum people, every year, they used to come onto here forever, getting a famous plant, the orchid, an orchid which means testicle, because if you dig up an orchid, there's 2 tubers that sit together, and they were the tubers that they used to dig up, but the leaves of our terrestrial orchids only show a leaf at certain times of year. So they would time their nomadic lifestyle in their hunter-and-gatherer styles to come here to arrive in our August, but they had their own seasonality, but they'll arrive here in around our August to get this special leek orchid so they could get the tubers. Do you reckon they were horrified the day they came down, and on August the 28th it had all been burnt, and this Yorkshire diet had planted it up. So they went onto the island, where's our orchids? But then they found this guy had potatoes, so they helped themselves to them. Anything that grew in the ground belonged to everyone. And it would lead to a fight over here, right here at the mouth of the deep river. Near one of these islands, there was a fight. And one of the Aborigines was tragically shot. The doctor was a doctor. He didn't want to fall out with them. But in the event that they saw him taking all his potatoes, he was very upset. And even though he didn't shoot, he was offside. Mr. Crutchley accidentally shot one. He shot him not with the go-ahead of the doctor. The doctor did what he could, trying to stop a major artery that had been wounded in his back. And he then feared the retaliation, and he left this island and left this place, and our family bought it. But when our family came here, we didn't know about some of the plants here, and that plant there would kill our cows on the island. We took their plant and sent it to the Melbourne Botanic Gardens, and so what ended up happening is the first director of the Melbourne Botanic Gardens, Dr. Baron Sir Ferdinand Jakob Heinrich von Müller, would send it to Germany and to try and isolate this unbelievable poison. A poison that's colourless, tasteless, odourless, traceless, dissolvable in the water, has a delayed reaction after a couple hours. It was an ultimate weapon of mass destruction. Yet there's an animal who lives on this island who lives off it. And it's bizarre. and I found his poo. I'll get his poo box. It's unbelievable. Thanks. Just we can reverse up there. Thanks, Claire. In here, this is it. And when it's living all under this plant, it's square poo. Now we often know that poo is square from diprotodonts like wombats, but this one isn't. This is from a quokka, and this island is literally chock-a-block full of quokka. And one of the reasons why, well, quokkas aren't on the mainland, aren't they only on Rottnest? Well, they're not, because of that plant. Because anything that's introduced, like our cows, like even people who came here, they can't eat that plant because they haven't evolved with this plant. This plant set up a relationship, an arms race with the animals that would eat it. It produced this poison that would stop the energy cycle, the Krebs cycle, with this acetate, and then some of the animals learned to adapt to it so they could eat it. And then this included the quokkas, so the plant became more and more toxic and the animals became more and more tolerant in this amazing arms race, and we now have a poison that can tell the difference between introduced animals and the native animals here that have evolved with it. And so only this plant, mainly in the southwest of Western Australia, the animals here can live on this plant, and in a way that saved them from the introduced animals that are threatening these species. We still have quokkas on the mainland because they were tolerant to the poison, and a fox would eat a quokka and the fox would die due to secondary toxicity. And so even though not all of them would happen, the population has still existed. It's an amazing association that's allowed its protection even from us. This area had been talked about. These American whalers used to talk to all the colonisers, and when this is, remember, the whalers were here long before even Albany and even the Swan River colony in Perth began. And they talked about a place, when the Swan River began, about trees on the water's edge, abundance of fish, fresh water, a safe entrance in from the ocean. It sort of had everything. And James Sterling, our first governor, everyone's complaining about the Swan coastal plain. After India broke off, it just filled up with sand, and it's just sand. So imagine a place that had trees the size of carry trees and tingles right the way on the water's edge. So all these times there was these sealers knew about what was called the secret entrance of the deep river, the sealers. And there was a man by the name of William Nan Clark, a Scottish lawyer who came in here, and he heard the rumours of this place. He befriended an old sealer in Albany to show him the secret entrance of the deep river of the sealers. He entered it. He said nothing was more pleasurable than gliding swiftly over the bar into the still bosom of those waters. He came through this cove here. He called it Sealers Cove, and the cove, he described it as the sealers emerged, these ex-convicts from Van Diemen's Land. They were rough people, and they came out on the bank here, said there they are, leading an idle life with the native women and children entirely excluded from human society and sleeping away their existence. He then carried on further. He went over to the island. He dropped off on Snake Island, Solomon Aspinall, the captain of the little sealing vessel the little schooner he was in, and he went exploring by himself. And he looked across here from the island at these two hills, and to him they looked joined. But as he got closer, it appeared they opened up, and the river between them, and he saw it was so beautiful, he described it in these magnificent words. He said, "The sail was truly delightful. The river appeared to be embosomed amongst the lofty wooded hills, with tall eucalypti trees close to the water's edge, and crowning the summits of those high hills, thus casting a deep gloom on the water, making the scenery the most romantic I witnessed in other quarters of the globe." So here, as we're coming through, this was the island, and now we're heading up towards the mouth. This is the secret entrance of the deep river of the sealers. Here's an old Aboriginal well, Nonakalap well, but what's interesting in looking at this, and you can see the depths, you know, isn't that deep? It's quite even, 3.8, 3.7, 4.6. But that's because that's where the silt from these rivers has actually made it more even. Remember, this was an ancient valley. The Walpole River used to come through here towards the island, and they joined together. There used to be a river that's running through here. And remember, 18,000 years ago, it was still 40-odd kilometres away. And as the sea pulsed its way up, this inlet would have been at one stage here. You know, that this river used to go through here. Then they came in, and this was always here, but this wasn't. This sand dune that's in front of us is actually only 6,700 years old. There's another river, the Franklin River, that comes through here. That used to wander out through here, but as the sea came in, it diverted it, came in so it can converge, and all the silts from these three rivers. The Franklin River goes for 420 odd kilometres. The deep river is the overflow of Lake Muir, goes for 120 kilometres, and then you've got the Walpole River that comes through here. So all three would allow some of the forest to still be preserved here. And the WA Museum in the inlet systems down here, they've looked at some of these and getting ages around 6,700 years old. You know, they can look at if it's preserved, it means the carbon's still intact. So the carbon that would be taken up by those trees included mainly, of course, carbon-12 means carbon's got 6 protons in its neutron, and 6 neutrons make 6 and 6 is 12. But sometimes the unstable isotope of carbon-14 has 2 more neutrons inside its nucleus and makes it unstable. Indeed, if I had a whole ball of carbon-14 atoms, that half of them would decompose at 5,730 years. That's their half-life. That would decompose nitrogen. Carbon-14 goes into nitrogen-14. What happens is one of the neutrons flicks off an electron, and therefore it becomes more positive, becomes a proton, goes one up in the periodic table. And we can now look at the forest that's here underneath us and date it and see exactly when the sea came into this level. This is the indication. It happened around 6,700 years. That last pulse came in and has covered a forest, because just over half of the carbon-14 has disappeared, and that worked out. So that hill here is only 6,700 years, and if you look at it on a photo, so you can really see this. This photo was taken in 1988. They were doing inlet systems, and it just shows you the magnificence of such a beautiful natural area that was so close to having a 40-foot channel through here and a city put in here, and now it's WA's first wilderness zone. But this is the sands that would block the rivers, and these trees on the water's edge, they didn't grow to the water. Remember, the water just came up to it, and they can survive right there on the water's edge. And so right underneath us is the same place where Aborigines have been hunting kangaroos and quokkas right underneath. What you're looking down, what we're going over is like a natural treetop walk with the whole area of discovery underneath us. What's happening here is quite special. We've gone from suddenly not being able to see the floor of the inlet because the river waters are getting undercut by the salt water. See, and the stingrays are here. Here they are, here they are. The stingrays love what's called the Moses line. The blue water we're about to come into is actually from a different, it's from the Pacific Ocean. We're on the Southern Ocean, the next ocean is the Indian Ocean, but this is water from the Pacific. It's warm water that's coming in, and all these stingrays, these are the breeding eagle rays, they love the Moses line. And the blue waters come in underneath the fresh water on the top. So this is all mirrored. It has a sapin and a surfactant effect that comes from the three rivers, the Franklin, the Deep and the Walpole. But as we get up here and see how the surface ripples finish, we'll get into pure ocean water. Here it is, the Moses line, right here, right that line there, and now we're into the ocean. And all the stingrays, they come in through here. But what's really bizarre is the temperature of the water. We just went up 4 degrees in temperature in the water. This water is now, if I feel it with my feet, it's like 20 degrees. And if I did it back there in the inlet, it was literally like only 14, 15 degrees. So how can it be? We're on the Southern Ocean, meant to be a cold ocean, yet this is warm as water. So what I need to do, I'm just going to get my globe to explain the amazing process that's happening, what we've just done. In the big scale, this water is so clear because it's nutrient poor. So, and see the ripples are now there. You can see where the saponins have closed it off from the rivers, and this is where the rivers have happened here. It's indeed how they found this secret entrance. Normally, the waters are dark and go out to sea. I'll just show you on that picture. This is what the water should look like. At the moment, we're coming in through here. This should be all red water because there's 3 rivers running here. Why isn't it? Because the sea has pushed back all 3 oceans. And the reason why is because there's a storm. For every 7 millibars drop in atmospheric pressure, we get a 10 centimetre rise in tide, and that causes the sea to lift and push back the rivers. And why we say it, it's literally called the Moses line because you're parting the Red Sea. The blue water has pushed it to the side. Now, the reason it's the difference is this thermal haline. It's like, this is where we are here. This is the Indian Ocean, this is the Southern Ocean going around, a cold, nutrient-rich current, but this is nutrient-poor. One of the things you see so well in it, it hasn't got the phytoplankton, the dinoflagellates, the foraminiferas, it's just not as much that's in there. The reason why, because the water originates here. It's the Southern Ocean is getting influenced by the Pacific. When the sun heats the Pacific Ocean, it causes the water to absorb that heat and then causes the air above it to rise. It goes towards the poles, and when it comes back with the Coriolis effect of the Earth, it causes the trade winds to blow warm water through the Indonesian flow through until it sits here above the northwest shelf above Broome. And then, bizarrely, it starts a north to south current. This should not exist. If you look at it around the world, here,
about the Lewin current.
Yeah, the Lewin current. That's right. Here is the Humboldt current. The gyres in the southern hemisphere go anti-clockwise, and that causes the nutrient-rich cold waters that can even bring penguins up to the Galapagos, for goodness sake. And here is the Benguelan current that comes past Cape Town. You hop into Cape Town water on the equivalent latitude as we are, and it's freezing water because they're fed by the Southern Ocean. Yet this is warm. It's warm water because of the Lewin current brings that warm water from that originated in the Pacific through here past Broome, following the coast around, but when it goes around Augusta, it washes up into here, up the Brooks's Canyon, because there's a canyon here, and brings Walpole this amazing warm water. It's the reason we never get frosts here. We don't get below 6 degrees. Everywhere else can get cold because we've got this warm water surrounding Walpole. We're the wettest part of the state, and we're the least area of climate variation in the state. We don't get too hot, but we don't get too cold, and that has allowed ancient species still to survive in Walpole because it's linked to this ancient current, the Lewin current, that keeps our climate more closely related to of our time when we're still joined down in part of Gondwana. As we broke off, we didn't break off Gondwana from Tasmania here 38.4 million years ago is the latest that the Tasman Seaway opened. So we broke away here. Drake's Passage, when South America broke away, it opened up, causing the circumpolar current to isolate Antarctica and stop the warm water from keeping this used to be a beautiful rainforest. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, 40 million years ago, you could still walk all the way from Papua New Guinea all the way to Rio. Wow, you could have done it. And that's indeed the route that the marsupials took. I mean, one of the marsupials originated in China. They split. The oldest marsupial, Sinodelphis alaei, 125 million years old. The oldest placental animal found also in China, Jeremiah. So, and even some of the oldest mammals here, you know, Hadroconian, one of the oldest. So the mammals and their diversity really happened in China. They spread to around the world. The oldest here in France, here we're looking in France, they've got a 99 million year old marsupial. In Utah, in America, there's a 110 million year old marsupial. There's marsupials found, fossils in Morocco, in Tunisia, in South America, and they just climbed across here, very small little guys here, and went across into Australia, and then as we broke away, we literally drifted in isolation and spawned the host of species. Now Australia changed so much, but in Little Walpole has held on to some of the older species because of this Lewin current, has kept our climate so closer to related to our times of Gondwana. And indeed, within the forests of Walpole, you'll find some of the older species, including one of the most ancient spiders. It used to be called the Mogradigii. Recently had a new taxonomic change called Bertmania tingle. And you'll see that, and it's because it's all linked to this water that has allowed our climate to hold on to those ancient species, and why Walpole has become a real ancient empire of holding into a great way in looking at the past in whichever level you want to look at.
What's his name?
Bengasul.
Wow.
This is a breeding bay for these bays. One of the reasons they got protected in West Australia, people have built such an association with, well, it used to be one called Herbie. He had no tail. Some people even called him Stumpy, but we didn't ever look at that fault. And someone speared him, and it would cause so much emotion here. It even went into the courts, and not only did we get the reservation of these rays here, but it also would lead to other waterways to get the reservation of these amazing animals. And this, because it does stay open, this mouth, it means that they can breed in here, and they really are the dominant one now. Now Herbie passed away last February, and now Bengasul has taken over, but with a competitor, Luca. In this inlet system we have the only recorded albino black ray. So he's pure white, but he's one of those black rays. And very rarely we see him, but he's now coming in more since Herbie's gone. So what we're going to do, we're going to pull over here into the depot. We can go forward if you like, Claire. But this is one of the reasons we cleaned our boots for diaback. It's the biggest threat to biodiversity that we have here. Diaback is a water mold. They used to think it was a fungus, but they found it's not a fungus. It's a root pathogen that attacks especially Proteaceae, but actually 46% of our plant species, so nearly half of the things you see here, diaback, can take out. So you've got your Zamia palms here, those ancient cycads, you've got the grass trees, the xanthorrheas, the bulgars, and you've got these magnificent banksias. For example, these banksias are in flower right now, and these banksias are in flower, and they're attracting every morning a crepuscular animal. Crepuscular means twilight. And it's the honey possum, Tarsippis rostratus, one of the most basal diprotodonts. The diprotodonts, one of the early of the marsupial groups, like the possums, the wombats, the koalas, and in the megafauna like the Thylacleo carnifex, a marsupial cat whose footprint's been recently found here in Walpole by Flinders University. But there's a very small marsupial, the emblem of this area, Tarsippis rostratus, the honey possum, and in the morning he comes to these trees here and he searches. He only lives on pollen and nectar. He's an amazing animal. He has the largest testicles per body size than any mammal on earth, has the largest sperm than any mammal on earth. She has the smallest baby than any mammal on earth, like the 4,000ths of a gram. Like to weigh a basmati rice grain unsaturated weighs 20 milligrams. You need 5 babies to make up the weight of a basmati rice grain. And this little animal lives here. I'm going to show you a picture. And here he is. This is a new book that's just been done on this amazing animal, the emblem of our national park, a guy this big. I mean, look at this. This is a male. That's the size of his testicles. You can't beat that one here.
Wow.
And he is
That's
a
well
classic. Yeah, he's very special. And in the mornings, this is the only plant that's keeping him alive. And so if you brought dieback over here, dieback would take this out, this pathogen that the English are blaming the Dutch. They call it Phytophthora cinnamomi. It was thought the Dutch East India Company, the Verenigde Oost-Indische Company, would actually collect the spices, and on one of the spices was the cinnamon. And the cinnamon harboured this pathogen that got taken back to Europe, and then it's been brought back to Australia in the horticultural industry. And when it was brought back into Australia, of course, it started to impact our native animals, our native plants, which also infects the animals as well, because banksia, for example, are keystone species, and if you take out your banksia, they end up like that. It means the honey possum hasn't got anything left to go to, and we start to lose those animals. So it's another one of those invasive species, and probably the biggest killer to biodiversity in Australia. You can actually put your foxes, your cats, your pigs, your cane toads, your goats together. In relation to biodiversity, Phytophthora cinnamomi is having a bigger impact of all of them put together. So one of the reasons for this wilderness area, we have boot cleaning stations, so we don't take it into this very special area we're about to enter, WA's first wilderness zone, the Newts Wilderness. Now these banksias are really quite a special plant. This is, remember, this is a banksia seminuta, a river banksia. They grow up to 30 metres high. This is a banksia. They're growing 30 metres. They have been here for so long. They build up all these associations. Even the peregrine falcons, they can't come. They come here to feed off the New Holland honey eaters that feed off them. We've actually had a peregrine take a New Holland honey in front of us right here. We have that honey possum that comes in here, so imagine the removal of this. But what happens, this is what dieback does. I took this photo. I've been working with dieback most of my life. I was first exposed to this by, I was a runner, and my zoologist teacher was telling me about the honey possum, how if we leave these banksias, when dieback moves in, this root pathogen that originates from the Dutch East India Company collecting the spices and bringing them back. When it got brought into here, you can carry it in your shoes, you can carry it in soil and plant material, move it, it can change it to that. And we've lost all our honey possums here.
So this is the same place?
This is just on the border with this same place.
Wow.
So this is just up above it, so, and I'm on the border. This is where the infection, all this is gone now. This is now like that. We've been back this, I took this in 2008, and now it's all like this. This is just to the border, to the side of it. And so the whole ecosystem's changed. Even the understory, you see what's happened. You've just lost all that diversity. So when we have special areas coming into place that still have the magnificent banksia stands, this keystone species, a keystone, the arch of the keystone of an arch, it holds it up. If you take that keystone out, it all collapses, and this is a keystone species. Every one of these little flowers here, if you look up onto a flower, when these ones here, this is a little bit older, but they start as a male, right on the end where the pollen is, it's a male. And when a pollinator comes in, whether it's a honey possum or a beetle or a bird, they take the pollen off, and then in 9.8 seconds, it turns to a female. So another one comes through, and so the pollen will go all the way down and fertilise it. So when you've got a fertilised one, if we can find a nut, maybe there's a nut that's here. So if you see the nut right up here, you can see the ones that have had that double fertilisation, they started as a male, the flower, then it became a female, it's had 2 visits, and then it's pollinated, the seeds formed, and they've opened. So every time there's an opening, it had those 2 visitors. It's an amazing flowering plant of the angiosperms, really ancient in the angiosperms. So this is a very special area to make sure that we do protect it from Phytophthora. But yet the track we're about to go is being used by the Aborigines, by the sealers, by the stockmen, by visitors enjoying this place. We're going to our family's favourite spot, and I'm looking very forward to sharing it with you. 2 whales here. So over here, at the moment, where we're looking south in the direction of Antarctica. Indeed, if you go 3,500 kilometres down this direction, you get to Antarctica, you get to around Casey Station. Indeed, these rocks over here, these ancient granitic 1.2 billion year old gneiss rocks, are actually mirrored at Casey Station. Our continental shelf is so close that, you know, even though it's not these actual rocks that broke away, even though they have found parts of the Mawson Craton over here, when we separated, and of course they're still the same rocks. Now something happened that was amazing with the whales. Before we broke off, there weren't baleen whales, there were only toothed whales. Now, you know, whales, their most closest common ancestor on land is the hippopotamus, and when we were ever studying zoology, whales were always put in the order of Cetacea, but they're no longer in the order Cetacea because they found a hippopotamus is more related to whales and dolphins than it is to any other of the even-toed ungulates, the artiodactyls, which is the order it belongs to. So you can't have two orders with something in the middle. So now what's happened, the Cetaceas are now being embedded in the middle of the artiodactyls, where the hippo, which is even-toed ungulates, like you've got cows, you've got sheep, you've got pigs, you've got hippos, and so off the hippo lineage is all the cetaceans. So now it's been a composite called Ceta artiodactyl, so the cetaceans and the artiodactyls together. But what happened when we broke off Antarctica and the Tasman Seaway opened and Drake's Passage opened, started the circumpolar current, it also started a new ecological niche. Suddenly, with all that rich fertilizer that was getting brought up with the circumpolar current, that frigid waters that would promote the phytoplankton that would be eaten by the zooplankton, the krill would take off, and the toothed whales were the ones who were surviving. The ones went more and more like those baleen filter systems. And so the baleen whale actually evolved in these waters here. And as we're drifting away, of course, those waters are getting further and deeper and deeper and further away with our 6.7 millimeters every single year. But every year the whales come from those cold waters up into these warm Lewin current waters, this Pacific Ocean water, and even though they don't feed much, they do feed. We have actually seen them feeding off some opportunistic fish that have come through in these waters, but they'll come up and they'll mate, and then another 3 years they'll mate again, but they still bring their kids up and show them these waters. So every year we have whales, and if you scan right the way through here, you'll often pick up a whale all this time of year coming up to breed. Look for is just the spurts coming through. They're all in here somewhere. This is a Bothriembrium. He is also an ancient link to our Gondwanian past. There's relatives that are found in Africa. There's a few what we call REGIs. It's an acronym for literal endemic Gondwanian invertebrates. And this is the Bothriembrium is one of them, and so he's still hanging around here, one of our ancient land snails. And there's ones in the Karri forest and the Tingle forest as well, who's a darker form, and sometimes you may come across them. But it's a real honour on this slightly wet, warm day to have him coming out and seeing us today. But again, there's another invasive snail, the Italian snail, that's competing these guys out, and that's also not been brought in this part of the peninsula, but we actually have school groups coming down to this area, removing the invasive snail to protect this guy here, our native Bothriembrium. And so here, look here. Here, this uncovered about 20 years ago. Many of the shells have actually gone now, but this is similar. You've got these ancient root systems here, and yet these old parts, remnants of the shells here that were thought to be part of a midden, a shell midden. But if they were sitting here at the tree, this was 7,000 years ago, but these are like inlet shells. Like these cockles are from when the inlet was actually over here. And you'd imagine a sandbank at the back there, and them sitting down here looking at the inlet, and then the ocean's in there. It's just another snapshot in time. So what we have here is the remains of an amazing tree stump. It's not just a rock, it's not a piece of limestone. Limestone's made out of calcium carbonate. And this is certainly made out of limestone. It's a calcium carbonate, and this is a Holocene carbonate, still part of the long Quaternary Ice Age, that what we call the Tamala limestone. But look at it, it's actually a tree stump with root systems on here. Many years ago, you've got to imagine there was trees that were here, like this. The sea came up, rose 130 metres. With the sea, it brought the sand. It covered up the forest. So all the tree stumps happened. So what happened with them, the forest, normally the forest would disintegrate, but something special's happened here. Inside these here, if you look here, these are bits of marine shells. These are actually, this looks like they're off a cuttlefish. That's made out of calcium carbonate. It's really special that the marine animals started to use the mineralisation from the waters and form shells and teeth. And you know, as predators started to come on, you either got big, you got protection, or you got out of the water. And so some of these sands, this sand is made up of silicon dioxide, you know, it's just silica, it's broken down quartz. But in amongst it, that really makes it quite white, is the calcium carbonates. Well, when we breathe out carbon dioxide, it goes into the water in the rain, and if you got H2O plus CO2, it gives you H2CO3. Carbolic acid, and that carbolic acid goes through, it dissolves the marine shells, and that's what the big issue with so much more carbon dioxide going into the water, more acid rains, and even if you turn your seas acid, the acid starts to dissolve all the shells. But that's exactly what happens here. That acid rain goes through, it dissolves it into from calcium carbonate to calcium bicarbonate in its liquid form, and then it settles around the root systems and it forms a cast. And if you look closely, there's a different colour. That's the cast, and then as the root disintegrated, it refilled with more calcium bicarbonate that evaporated to calcium carbonate, and you've got a cast and a copy of the original tree. And that's what these tree stumps are here. Now, what's happened, this track has caused an erosion, and it's actually exposed these root systems to here. But if these are root systems that came from a trees that used to be part of a forest, they didn't grow in sand. There's no way they can build a stump these big and root systems to a big tree that would have been up there growing in sand. So if it's sand that got covered over the top of these root systems, it shouldn't be very far to find the soil. And if you come here, this is really quite special. Say for example, if you dig down here, this is the sand, and as you dig down, you come to the ground. And in here, they're all fossils, are in here. So you watch. Look at that. That's the soil of the ancient forest that was here before the seas rose after the last glaciation meltdown that peaked at 18,000 years ago, when the sea was 40 kilometres away and it came up, covered the forest. And that mark there, that line right there, is the same age as the inlets. Remember, it was 6,700 years old. In other words, the last time any person walked on that spot was 6,700 years ago. And we know they walked here because we found artefacts at that level. We found shell middens, but the shells were from an inlet when the inlet was there. So where we've come is quite special. This is the Southern Ocean. This is the thunder from down under. Yet this bay is so protected because this peninsula goes out for another kilometre on a 90 degrees, and that protects it. And this is why the ships could pull into this area here, like these American whalers, and they would come into this secret entrance. This is the one the Scottish lawyer described as nothing was more pleasurable than gliding swiftly over the bar into the still bosom of those waters. And this little area over here is one of our earliest trading places. It's called the depot, and these ships would come in with their longboats. They would moor here, come through here, moor with their longboats here, and do the trading with the sealers that came from here through Sealers Cove, and this is where they're trading. Now what would you trade here? Pork, biscuits, ammunition is what they wanted, but they traded seal pelts. But there's also the dark side. One guy here, 2 American Negroes, an Eastern States Aborigine, an Arnhem Land Aboriginal girl, 2 marriages. There was nearly like a slave trade that was happening here. It was pretty rough, and there's even a new book just been released by Sarah Drummond called The Sound. It's about these sealers, historical fiction, but it was launched here because this was the deep river of the sealers, where this historic way. So they're the first sort of white man that was coming through into here. The first explorers, there was a beautiful example of, no one could find this entrance. If you're going past in a ship, you would never see this. But it was that dark water, that tannin-stained waters, that when the rivers are running, this should be all blood red. And that blood red water would go out to sea, and the ships would see, oh, this is different water, and realizing it's an entrance to a river, and that's how they discovered the secret entrance of the deep river of the sealers, what the Aborigines called Nononup, place of the black snake, the Murrum people. Now also on the edge, it's sort of, this is their sand dune, this 6,700-year-old sand dune that was sitting up. You got to remember, before the seas were rising, this was the bush. The bush was here. This one had a little river going through here, and indeed maybe that was the inlet, was more over here. The Franklin River came through here, but as the seas rose, and remember it rose 130 metres in 18,000 years, and it would bring up the sand that would block off these 3 rivers to form the inlet system that was all behind us in here, and would preserve where those trees are being preserved underneath us. But these rocks on this side here are the remnants of that mountain range that formed when we smashed into Antarctica and pushed up this amazing range higher than the Alps. And this is what they look like. This is what the Swiss Alps will look like in a few years' time. But if you go through into these rocks, and this is where the paleomagnetists have taken core samples in part of what we call the Albany-Fraser erogenous zone. Orogeny is mountain building, where the Mawson Craton and the Organ Craton came in, one went underneath, pushed up that mountain range and metamorphosized the rocks. So we can date them as well, and that was the amazing dating, was 1.2 billion years older, the metamorphism of this 1.8 billion year old granites, and this is where they happen. These 2 are called Ross's marbles. These are the ones, ever since I was a kid, they were always special in our family. But we've had even our own lives, 8 generations coming through here. And this area was our family stock lease, and we were brought here by the Murrum people who are able to share their amazing understanding of, here I'm talking about 8 generations, woo! But that was nothing compared to the Murrum people. We've got artefacts in the southwest of WA 47,000 years before present. And that's talking a couple thousand generations have been here. So it's such an honour to have to spend time with the Murrum people through our family's time that's been passed on to generations, that I can be able to share it with others. But this was always a very special spot. Indeed, a film is about to be relaunched here this year, and you'll recognise this view in the film Breath. And so all this, it's influenced so many people's lives, this very spot, that it forced this now, instead of being a city, has now become WA's first wilderness zone and first protected waterways. A very beautiful area. And this is our family's favourite spot. We've had 161 years day parties. Our cows were brought down to the coast just after Christmas. They were belled up, every third cow would bell up. But the most exciting part of the day was on New Year's Day, the family would come across here to our favourite beach. But it was also been a favourite place for the Murrum people. The sealers used to come down here to signal the American ships. The Murrum people, there's artefacts on these ancient granitic rocks, and even these rocks themselves are the remnants of that mountain range that formed. They are the core of the mountain that formed over 1 billion years ago, and this is what has been left of those areas. But these ancient granites covered with this, one of the first living organisms to emerge out of the sea, these rhodophyta lichens, a symbiotic relationship between fungi and algae. They got together, got married, Mrs. and Mrs. Lichen, and to come out of the water and survive into that harsh environment. The UVB rays have been blocked by the ozone from the cyanobacteria that have been producing in the oceans, and the oceans turn red, forming the great iron ore mines that we have, the iron ore BIFs, the banded iron formations in the northwest. But when it ran out, it went into the atmosphere, giving us what we now perceive this poisonous gas to be oxygen that we use, has now gone into O3, 3 molecules together up in the stratosphere, blocking off the UV rays, and stuff start coming out of the water. And right there, some of that orange rhodophyte lichens were the first, after the slimes on the edge, to get away from the waters, and it's all living here on one of our favourite places. And as you come round through these ancient hills, we've got this old group of islands out the back here. Here we have, this is the second largest rookery in the world of the fleshy-footed shearwaters, living in these ancient Tamala limestones. The limestone we saw as the stumps was 6,700. That was from the most recent sea rise that brought the sand and calcified the root systems. But we're looking over here at the previous sea rise, like 100,000 years ago, of the Tamala limestones from the previous time it came up. And in this limestone, it's the same age as around the corner where a full footprint of a Thylacoleo carnifex, the pouch flesh-eating lion that used to be the predator to here. Here our greatest predators that we're looking at here are little quolls and yellow-footed antechinus, part of the daisy-urids. But there was a time, there was an ancient relative of those diprotodonts from the vombata, from the koalas and wombats, of the ultimate predator. The strongest mammalian jaw on earth used to be here underneath, that used to wander through these forests before even the seas had risen, coming up time and time again. All is changing, and yet there's cycles in it all. So this is quite special. Here we've got a western grey kangaroo coming through here. He's a massive, this is a big boomer. His name's actually Fudge. He lives on this peninsula, and he's gone up the hill and then he's come back down here, putting his front paws even down here. And look at him, look at the size, it's like a handprint. He's huge. This is a big boy. He's got his hands, he's just pushed through. This is his tail coming through here. And as they come through, they too are part of the diprotodonts. Like wombats, they have squarish looking poo. So, you know, he's gone, he has his poo eating quite well. But, there's an issue here when you get stuff like this. See this? This area is still impacted by, this is dog prints coming through here, even still, you know. Even from the original times, ever since the dingo got introduced into Australia 4,000 years ago, potentially now by Silawaisan traders, because they found the DNA of the dingo is more from the Chinese, Southeast Chinese dog rather than the Indian dog where it was first thought of. But even then, when they got here, the dingoes as that first dog, even they would have had problems eating the quokkas and some of the animals in southwest WA because they hadn't built up that tolerance to 1080 poison. But as more and more humans have come in here, they brought in their invasive species, and we've got dogs, we've got cats, we've got foxes. They're still predating of us, even the rabbits that have still come through here, and they're impacting all of these. Even as the rabbits started off in Winchelsea, Christmas Day 1859, 24 rabbits, 5 hares and 29 partridges released on Christmas Day outside Geelong. They crossed through into Australia. Around 65% of the native mammals, mid-sized mammal species in Central Australia disappeared. 85% of the native rodents. They came to West Australia. We tried to put the big fence up. Even our family in West Australia, when you look at Australia here, and the rabbits released here, they came through. They didn't go much north. Our family also, we're here in Walpole, but we started Eucla, and in early 1900s we had a catch turn up with hundreds of cats for our family to release, to stop the rabbits trying to cross. Can you imagine? We brought in cats. It's unbelievable. But the rabbits kept going through and the cats are still building up. So we tried the big fence that came through, and then they got through there. A second fence was put down. A third fence went out to Kalbarri to try and stop them in. They were building up in bundles and going across. Even cats were released there. And now they've had such a big impact. But even now the cats, we now have on average across the whole of Australia, we now have around 17 million animals every single day are eaten by our introduced cats. And that's not even talking about that threat of the rabbits and the foxes in there. It is such an issue that we see, but we're about to go into a wilderness area that still has really, we've tried to keep them away. And so we're going to see what other tracks we can find going over into the wilderness. So here we have, this is actually a wild dog. There's no human footprints. This is wilderness. This is a wild dog. But as it's coming through, we're converging. Look at this. We've got a Ricali, the native Australian otter. So here he is coming through. Look at this, they're just thinking. I mean, it was different times. And over here, who we got here? Bird going through here. Got the
and it crosses over again.
Over here.
Another crossover.
Wow. Wow. No way. Look at this. This is what I thought it was. This is a quoll. This is the native cat. This is the cat. You've got the 4 claws going forward. It's the only one that's been recorded here in last November. We're really worried about this with this introduced fox, and here he is. This is Daisy Uridae. This is Joffwarii. This is the predator who should be here and not this one. They've only come back since we've been removing the foxes and the cats from this area, and this is really significant. We got Ricali, we got quoll, and yet we still got predators. It doesn't finish. The fight doesn't finish. It's about protecting this guy here, because when our family first came out, they never recorded quolls here. But the dingoes, of course, were controlling these guys at that time, but after the baiting that was happening and anything that has been introduced has been able to allow animals in this wilderness area to come back. And our most significant one here, look at this, a native cat coming back into this wilderness. It's really special to see, but the threat is still there. This is the western quoll, Joffwarii. It was named after one of the daisy urids. And we haven't seen this on the beach for so long because the dingoes had always been here, and then they've gone. But have they gone? Because right next door to it is a dog print right here coming through. A wild dogs, they're still coming through. It's travelling in a dead straight line just like a dingo. I mean, these were the guys that replaced these when our family first, we never saw this on our beach, and now we're seeing it again by removing our predators, but still this threat is on. It's amazing to have this convergence of this native animal coming through with this introduced animal by humans. This anthropocenic impact is happening right here, and we're lucky here because these guys will predate on there, but it's slightly times have passed, diverging off into the distance. One day, if their times cross at the same time, there may be only one set of footprints on there, and it may not be the quoll. But all along is this one that's always related to it. To have him here on the day you arrive is just so special. And so we put night cameras up, and we couldn't believe seeing white spots on the side of this animal, and here he is. And see what's happening here. You've got an introduced predator standing in the footprint, on the top of the footprints of the local predator. This is the quoll. Hasn't been seen. One of our rarest animals for this part of this. It's so rare to have here in this part of the southwest. And here we have those very distinctive four toes that are coming off up the front. And who's sitting right in the middle of it? The introduced predators. Amazing. Daisy Urda. So often when you're looking at the debris that comes up, you know, cuttlefish, this is one of the most intelligent of invertebrates, these are invertebrates, we're vertebrates, yet these have got better eyes than us, a massive brain. And you see when you've got the dark, this is the ink that often means it's been attacked, it's released its ink and it's absorbed into the cuttle. The cuttle is used, it's light, it's flight. With most of the cephalopods, they put the shells on the outside for protection. One of them mutated and put it on the inside, but they started to adapt with it, still dying out. They use it as a hydrostatic equilibrium. They fill it with different gases like nitrogen at different levels, and they use an osmosis to move it in and out to give them that hydrostatic equilibrium in here. So this one's had a go at by birds on the edge here. These are sometimes different species. It's not just baby ones. Oh, look at this one. This one here has actually been attacked by a dolphin. So that's classic dolphin bite there. Dolphins love these. You often get those teeth separations coming in. Also, amazing, one of the toothed whales, the toothed cetaceans that's still here. And they love this area. So what you're looking at is this amazing billion-year journey of these rocks. You imagine how I said from the North Pole, to put it into perspective, imagine here's the world, here's the North Pole, here's the South Pole, here's the equator. Now, different times of years, here we are here at the moment, 35 degrees south of the equator for Australia. But if you remember going back a billion years ago, we were right up here, joined with a bit of India and smashing into Antarctica at the 58 degree parallel, 1.2 billion years ago. There was other parts of the proto-continents that came together as part of Rodinia, and then we all started to work our way down south. So we crossed the equator at about 700 million years ago. Australia was more on its side. So at the same time that South Australia was above the equator, Walpole was south of the equator. Of course, we're still joined with Antarctica here, and India was still in here. And then, of course, once we crossed over there, we started to get away from the Ediacara and studying into the Cambrian, and that's where in the Cambrian we joined onto South America, and Africa joined on together to really get that formation of Gondwana together. And as we still drifted to get down south, everyone joined together as part of Pangaea, and then as we were drifted right down south, then the northern hemisphere, Laurasia started to drift off, but Gondwana was still hanging in here. Africa would break off around 140 million years ago. So everyone forgets Arabia, but they don't like to miss out. And here's, as Africa drifted to the north, forming the Alps as it pushed up here. There's a fish who lives up here, whose closest relative is still here in Walpole, called Lepidogalaxicus salamandroides, and it's a link. There's this spider, the Mogradigi now known as Bertmania tingle, has its closest affinities with a spider here as part of Gondwana. But remember, India was still here. Here's Antarctica, here's the ancient part of New Zealand, here's South America, and what would happen, India would break off here, breaking off West Australia, 132 million years old. We know that from the black basalt rocks from the back beach of Bunbury have been dated. But as India bashed forward, bashed into Asia, it formed the Himalayas. And it hit so hard, not only pushing up the Himalayas, but on the other side, here, the bits of Bunbury's black basalt rocks have turned up in Kobe province in Tibet. Chinese geologists have found the other side of the Darling Scarp. The New Zealand slipped off to the side. We're buckling our way. The proto-Southern Ocean is forming. Drake's Passage hasn't formed through here. New Zealand's broken off. Now, I'm going to open up into Mercator projection. Let's just put in a little bit of a Russia and a little bit of North America here. Imagine the end of the Earth's opening up. Australia started to drift to the north here 34.8 million years ago. South America had also broken up. The Isthmus of the Panama hadn't formed yet. Warm water from the Atlantic to the Pacific was continuing to keep this ice free. But then what happened, how the Quaternary Ice Age was actually starting up, is when the Isthmus of the Panama blocked off the and then the ice melted and the seas rose and the earth is still there. And so what happened here in the Atlantic and the Pacific, it blocked it off, and that caused the Gulf Stream, bringing warm water up to here, causing more fresh water to run on Siberia, causing the fresh water to sit on the Arctic, and that Arctic would literally ice up quicker, and that would start the 2.5 million year old Quaternary Ice Age that we're in. But of course we're fluctuating. Here we are. This is the Ice Age here from 2.5 million years ago. This is to today. We're down here into a balmy interglacial. Remember, only 18,000 years ago we were in a glaciation that the sea level had dropped 130 meters. But it wasn't the first time it's happening. Even though it's more dramatic now, especially in the last million years, it's really getting... But we've been doing it like 17 times. But this last one has been the beginning of agriculture, where the grasses have taken over the human species and they're working together to have taken on the world. And it was also the time of the Homo species, from the hunter and gatherers from here to 2.5 million years. All these climate changes have shaped us. They've shaped everything that has brought us here to the world. And what's our future? Our future here is having the human footprint on it. We're going into the Anthropocene, where the humans are taking over. And even with the future of Australia drifting into Asia and China, with America moving across, with the Mediterranean disappearing as Africa takes it out to form the supercontinent of Amasia, will there be any relatives of Australia, of humans? Will there? It does depend on us how far we go, but we can extend that time. But our future is everyone together. one of the things that's really influenced who we are, and for us to be in Walpole with such iconic animals like who we saw jumping down the beach, is the western grey kangaroo. Something that you find that's so similar with them links back to the climate change that really has happened over the last 10 million years. Even though it's been fluctuating the climate up and down, there's been a trend for getting cooler and cooler and cooler. When you get cooler, you get drier conditions. So many of the species, you know, from us, for example, in Australia, we had coming in here, we had the possums. They're sort of the possum-like ancestors were the ancestors of the diprotodonts. But of course, as Australia started to dry, after we drifted off, the circumpolar current turned Antarctic to ice. It was really drying. As India bashed up into Asia and forming the Himalayas, that would drag with the monsoon rains, would drag the monsoon moisture-laden air away from Africa. It would cause more drying. So there was all these events that were causing cooling and drying, and we were a forest. The world was a forest, and then the grasslands and woodlands started to take over. And of course, what's going to happen to the species? They have to adapt. Exactly like what happened here in Australia. The possums came down onto the ground, and they became grazers. The grasses used the fire, their weapon of fire, to go through and burn into the drying conditions that supported them to take out some of those forests into woodlands. So animals came down, and one of the most efficient ways to actually move around, where you've got to move more distance than just going into your trees to get some leaves and some fruits and some seeds, is to get down. You have to move forward. And one of the most innovative ways of efficiency doing that is to become bipedal. And so in the end, these possum-like ancestors came down, always on all fours, still dragging their feet, but then some of them developed the ability to stand up. And one of the big features of a kangaroo is it's got one of the longest Achilles tendons that allows, and it has one of the most efficient ways in hopping of bioengineering to be an efficient way to move. Then you compare that what happened to here in Africa. The same thing, you had fruit-eating apes that on the margins of the woodlands, it wouldn't have mattered in the middle of the forest, but those on the margins, if you were to survive, you had to adapt. And that's when we start to see them coming down and to become foragers. So one of the best ways in efficiency to forage, where you've got to move forward, where your fruit's going to be more disparate, you've got to move forward, is to stand up. Again, so there was the ability to stand up, starting to build as well, their Achilles tendon, but they were still relatively small. We're talking about the age of the Australopithecines, the foragers, the ones like Lucy, and then they moved on. By the time the ice started with the Quaternary Ice Age, when the Isthmus of the Panama blocked off the flow of water that kept the ice free in the Arctic, when the isthmus formed, and it caused this beautiful warm water to come up that keeps good old, even Scotland's harbouring palm trees, and allow that water that would run on the top of the ice and cause the glaciations and the ice in the Arctic. Well, that started our Quaternary Ice Age, dry and dry conditions. Now, whereas kangaroos here, they started one of the most energy hogs of our bodies is the brain. So many of the marsupials, especially the diprotodonts, even like the koala, is still shrinking its brain. Its brain casing isn't even keeping up with it. So it was this technique, don't do much, don't use as much brain. And of course they didn't need long arms, no longer were they using it for climbing, so why waste energy on a kangaroo's arms? And they shrunk their arms. They still keep them there, and they'll even use it not just for the little bits of bringing stuff to their mouth, but they use it to cool down, especially as we're cooling and drying, and they lick the inside and the blood flow comes up, and they can do that. But look what's happening at that time in Africa. What you had is the fruit-eating mates coming down, they were foraging more, but then something different happened. They went to the Homo species, and that the key character of the Homos is that they started to be hunters as well as foragers, the hunter and gatherers. And instead of shrinking their arms and using their energy, lost that could have been used, they kept them and grown a big brain compared to what happened to the kangaroo. And that big brain has allowed them to function together because they could feed it. They had high quality foods. And by learning to forage more, they started to communicate together, work together as teams. They started their persistence hunting, from scavenging to hunting, and then they could reproduce more, and their dispersal would just spread. They wouldn't have known they were spreading. And there was a group that left Africa. They tried first 100,000 years ago. There was other Homo species. There's Homo erectus being found over with Peking man, and Homo erectus down in Java man that were found early on by Eugene Dubois. But also what happened, other ones would leave Africa, and especially after the Sumatra eruption 75,000 years ago, a group would leave Africa, go around Arabia, following the coast. They were coastal people, and remember the sea level was only about 70 metres lower than what it is, and they would come down, and even using boatcraft to get to Australia and follow down the coast. And when they came, the sea was going down, it wasn't coming up. They went from 70 metres to 130 metres deep, and the harsher and harsher conditions, and they adapted until they became meeting with the other bipeds. Here, these big kangaroos and the megafauna and Thylacolea, the impact would be huge on them with the humans coming in that had also adapted with big animals with a high metabolic rate. But the two bipedals would meet here again in Walpole. One's with a small brain, still licensed to carry small arms, but these other animals with these big brains that would still come here with just as a big Achilles tendon, with a waist, with a neck, and they would come here. And the two tracks you could see in the sands, the kangaroos and footprints together. But some of those ancient ones, they have gone, but still, in a way, they are together. And to make sure that future happens, we've got to make sure we can continue having both of them on our same beaches. Every time, even finding a rock, like here, it's a little bit of pumice. Now, why is there pumice here? Where's pumice from? Well, it's from volcanoes. Well, we don't have volcanoes here. But of course, it's come via the Lewin Current. And indeed, volcanologists have looked at a lot of this pumice of this one is actually from Rabaul. So here we're talking about one of the newest rocks. It's only, just over a quarter of a century old when Rabaul went up, and that war and the pumice went into the water, floated down on the Lewin Current. So here you're going right next door to each other, just 25 years old rock that's made out of exactly the same stuff as this. This is exactly the same, but this is a granitic gneiss. It's still made up from that, but this rock here, these feldspar crystals that are here, they're dated at around 1.8 billion years ago. But the grain on the outside is 1.2 billion years old. This is from the original granites. When we smashed into Antarctica, 1.2 billion years old is how old this one is, embedded with these feldspar and quartz eyes that were dated at only at 1.8 billion. So the original rocks, it metamorphosized, pushed up, caused this graining effect to happen up, forcing up a massive mountain range that's all eroded, that's here, and now that's covered with one of the first living organisms to emerge out, the rhodophyta lichen. We talk about the cyanobacteria, that the original photosynthesizers that produce the oxygen, and many of us think of the stromatolites that's still there in Shark Bay. By coincidence, right near there in West Australia, 1,000 kilometres to the north of Walpole, are fossilised stromatolites, 3.5 billion years old. The oldest tangible evidence of life on Earth found further to the north at the North Pole, fossilised stromatolites. But just to the east of Shark Bay is also the oldest crystal of the Earth's crust. So this is the antiquity of rocks themselves and of life in West Australia. It's all here. But living here right now is one of the earliest forms of cyanobacteria in this tufa. It's actually living here still producing the oxygen that we are breathing today. And even there, in those first organisms, they started to work out ways to get out of the bush. The filaments and these slimes and the mosses and the molds that would come to some of the early plants and the lichens. Life is all still here that came out of that primordial sea. And even though this is a nice little warm little pond, it's now looked at life coming from the rages of the oceans, even in the big deep. But to end up here, that would come up to us today. So here we have, look at the different rocks. Remember, this is this ancient granitic gneiss, but you're getting into this iron-stained calcium carbonates and stones and sandstones that come here. This actually designates where fresh water was actually coming through into the past. And and these waters would erode these crystals as well, and the chemistry would actually turn these. A lot of this is quartz, it's silicon dioxide, and these waters that would run through would bring in, and they would form the sands. But there's other crystals that are in here. It's not just silicon dioxide, SiO2. There's other ones where you're starting to get pure quartz in here, part of the feldspars. You're getting a bit of garnet crystals, and the garnets, they erode too. If you look closely, these are the purple. See the purple in here? So this isn't just silicon sand. What you're looking at here, this white sand here is SiO2, silicon dioxide. But this is heavy minerals here. What we're looking at here is actually the purple stuff is almandine garnet. So that is Fe3Al, aluminium 2, so 3 molecules of iron, 2 molecules of aluminium, Al2, silicon SiO4 3 times over. So that is really dense. So if you collected all this on, you could hardly hold it up compared to the less dense silicon dioxide. It's why they call this the heavy minerals. But in amongst the purple, you see this black, and that's even a denser. That's titanic iron ore. That's ilmenite. So that's Fe2TiO3. So what happens, we form from this blackest substance, it's actually mined to actually produce the whitest substance, titanium dioxide. So you remove the iron, you get rid of an oxygen, and you got titanium dioxide to produce the stuff we're putting in our sunscreen, our toothpaste, our paint pigments. And so these areas, you can look at it either as a resource, or you can use it as this is part of nature, and it doesn't always have to be exploited for the benefit of human. There's intrinsic values in this whole area to be here as itself, and it will still always end up being here. People have pulled up to this point. Imagine this has been the depot. First the Murrum people were walking around here to go over to spear groper on the other side. That was what they used to really enjoy doing. And then the sealers, the ex-convicts from Van Diemen's Land, would come across here in their boats and walk over here to signal the American ships to say to come in here. The big American whaling ships would come in here in the early 1800s, and they'd have a longboat, and all this trading was happening here. Then Dr. Henry Landor, when he first came in, the explorers, Lieutenant Preston met some Aborigines coming in here. He caught some fish, gave them to the Aborigines over there, and in the morning when he came back to here, the Aborigines had cooked the fish and gave it back to Lieutenant Preston. It was a really special bonding between two cultures that had just met. It was a wonderful event, just happened just there. Our family came down with our cattle, and we would go over here for 8 generations over to the beach for our New Year's Day, and the family still are there. My grandfather's buried there. My great-grandfather was accidentally shot and killed here, but they've all been in here. And then the first settlers started to arrive. A Frenchman, the Pierre Boulanger, that same man who would talk the ministers, they would see the beauty of this area, would influence him so much. He actually stayed at that spot right there, and he stayed here for a week in the infrastructure. This man was the lawyer. He was the lawyer of the Dreyfus affair. He was a junior counsel of the most influential law case where a French Jewish captain had been wrongly accused of selling secret documents after the Franco-Prussian War, and Emile Zola exposed it, that because he was Jewish, he was used as a scapegoat. They brought him back and found him guilty again to save the military. Politics came above justice. But this man, the lawyer, got shot in the back by some who represented Dreyfus, by some anti-Semitic fanatic, but his junior counsel feared for his life, left France to find a paradise at the other end of the world, and he ended up here just in time to talk the ministers into reserving this, to keep it in the reserved area that he had done. Then another Fabian philosopher, Frank, who would fall out with the Russians, would also escape to find a paradise. He would meet the minister who'd just been here with the Frenchman, and he came down here. Then the Swarbrick boat builders, literally, his wife went into tears, Tom Swarbrick's wife, because it was so beautiful, and they set up their famous boat building, and they would come to become the ones who would build Perry Banu that would circumnavigate the world, Jessica Watson's vessel, Jesse Martin's vessel, David Dix's vessel, the defending vessel of the America's Cup, the Kookaburra. The boat building began here in this little spot, and they used to pull up here. They would bring all of them, all their visitors who would want to enjoy this, to this very spot. And even today, there's still tours that have been going for 100 years. We've got surfers who are still coming up to the same spot. Do they know the history of the nature, the culture and the future, what they've just set in front of them? At the top here, in the silhouette, you see an osprey, and we thought it was just coincidence, but often he's actually waiting for us. As we go past, we move the fish, and so for ecotourism it's like a David Attenborough moment, DAM, that sometimes they'll dive right in front of the boat to catch their fish. But this is one of the raptors that actually lives here in harmony with this inlet system. We got 49 fish species. This area got reserved, and now it's the richest in diversity than any inland water in southwest WA. It was made from a vision to, instead of exploiting it, to reserve it, and now it's looked at a control and a vision for other places, that you can still come back and look at exactly the same place and it'll always be the same. These ospreys have always been up there, the great fish hawks, and they'll always still be here because this place is protected. Many years ago, our family would come down, before even Walpole existed. This is the famous boat builders who came here, and when they first came in, the Swarbrick, who are famous for all their yachts, they came in. You imagine this, before this was here, this was all curry trees. This is the Eucalyptus diversicolor, second tallest flowering plant on earth. Indeed, if you went to Europe and wanted to find the tallest tree in the whole of Europe, it's a curry tree from this area growing in Portugal. And they can grow nearly 100 metres high. The only one that's beating it in a flowering plant is the mountain ash, the one that's in Styx Valley in Tasmania. But this beautiful area, and when these areas have adapted to fire, you know, so obviously the grasses took over from the forest, but the forest also learned to adapt, and one of the great survivors of that forest in adapting with fire has been the eucalypts, as well as the understory. So when they Swarbricks described coming in here, there was the acacia bloom that was all going through, the white, the old man's beard, the Hovea elliptica, the purple peas, the Hardenbergia computonia, the red runner, the Kennedea coccinea. It was all a blaze of colour, so beautiful that she burst into tears. And they ended up coming here and securing this little area so people would enjoy. And from this very gazebo is where Lady Walpole, the boat that used to do this boat cruise that we're on, used to sit there. And my grandfather used to bring people across in his 1918 Dodge, and they take them off into the wilderness, and it's a great tradition that's still happening. And the Swarbricks' famous boat shed, just behind this double-storey building, and even today you think, well, you've discovered it all, but we've recently just discovered Leo Tolstoy's 80th birthday party keynote speech, said by his close friend Vladimir Grigorievich Chetkov, got found in a false floor in a boat shed in Walpole. Original letters from Alfred Russel Wallace, the man who would cause Charles Darwin to write The Origin of Species by means of natural selection. His papers were found in there. Photos of George Bernard Shaw, some of the most influential men. The man who owned the case lived next door to Rudyard Kipling, who wrote a poem, The Road to Mandalay, that a ship was named in Scotland after the same place, the capital of in Burma. That ship would get wrecked in Walpole and would be rescued by the same people who lived next door to the guy who wrote the poem. And on top of that gazebo is a spire that came off that ship. And when we found the case, there was a letter from the King of Norway, King Håkon VII, thanking Frank for a gold watch, with a gold watch. And these shipwreck victims were living off wild buffalo. It wasn't wild buffalo, they were living off our family's cows. And so there's a letter giving from the captain, £12 for our family, though my grandfather only got 7 because someone kept a fiver. But even cultural history, there's so much here that we still can discover. It's just looking further, looking in there, looking and finding something different. Little Walpole, this little town would start up here. So this is only new. There's so much history that has been here in the past. But long before this boat cruise, this Frenchman, this French lawyer of the Dreyfus Ferry who inspired this English philosopher who would also come down here in the Swarbricks, all these guys were taking people, enjoying. This place didn't really begin other than the sealers and the whalers. All this town began because of tourism, taking people to a place so they can enjoy nature. And it's inbuilt in us from that time we left Africa, that appreciation of water and resources in a beautiful place. But there was something else in there that's been special with this place. It has attracted many scientists and many people to study this area, its nature, its culture and its future. It comes back again and again to this place. And one of the things why, it also links in with what tourism is. Tourism about going to places and enjoying it. But there was one of my hero philosophers was Democritus, the man who came up with the word the atom. If you got a cake and cut it up, in Greek, the word cut means Thomas, and to not cut, when you couldn't cut that cake any further, it was A in the front of it, atom. He came up with atomic theory. He said everything is a collection of atoms, even we, and nothing exists except for atoms and the void. Everything we see, even us, is all made up of the same things. And this same man who thought stars were suns, that life became from some primordial ooze, this man 430 BC was coming up with these unbelievable ideas. But the thing that always stuck with me is that he tried to work, why are we here? Why are we here? And he realized it's because we enjoy life. We enjoy everything we enjoy has allowed for us survival. He knew about pain and pleasure, but it was the thing he concentrated. We eat, we enjoy it. We enjoy being with each other as a social animal, to communicate, to look after each other. We enjoy having babies. It's all part of why we are here. But he also remembered, when he thought of this, it was like an epiphany. He really enjoyed learning and understanding this. And he realized an important thing, that understanding and enjoyment are the same thing. And that is what makes this place special for as a communicator, to be able to take people to your favourite places and share it with them, raise their consciousness and awareness and understanding of their world and their role within it in a way that understandings that provokes them. This is the key for life, and life is to be enjoyed, understanding enjoyment, to do it in your favourite place with a group of friends. That is the secret of life.